Everybody who's been in real estate for more than a day has heard the term market value. Unfortunately, most people also think it means the same thing as appraisal value. And while in a normal market, these two terms might mean the same thing, in a rapidly increasing or decreasing market, the value of each can be drastically different. In this video, we're going to talk about what market value and appraisal value are and how they impact your job as a real estate agent. Hi, I'm Jeff with PropertyBrain, and in this video, I want to talk about market value and appraisal value. I want to talk about the differences between the two and ultimately how they impact your job as a real estate agent. So to get started, let's talk about the definitions of market value and appraisal value. Market value is simply just the value that a typical buyer would pay in an open market, and the appraisal value is just the value that can be supported by an appraiser through analyzing market sales data. If you're not that familiar with the appraisal process, it's important to know that there's three different approaches to value that are completed in an appraisal. Now, the first one is the sales comparison approach, and this is simply just the most similar way that an agent or even a homeowner values their house. It's by looking at similar comparable home sales and making adjustments to them to figure out where their adjusted value should fall. The second approach to value is the cost approach, and this approach to value uses a cost book to determine what the potential value is based upon the cost of the components of the property. Now, this is pretty common in new construction, and it can be common for a number of lenders to request this type of valuation as well for even existing homes, but generally it is not given a ton of weight as the rationality behind some of the cost books and cost metrics aren't extremely supportable, and therefore generally it doesn't receive as much weight as the sales comparison approach. The third approach to value is the income approach, and this is typically only used for investment properties as it estimates the value of the property based upon the revenue that is generated through the rental of that property. All right, so now that we've talked about what market value and appraisal value are, let's talk about how they compare. Ideally, in a perfect scenario, the market value and the appraisal value of a property would be the same thing. An appraiser would be able to identify market data that gives a perfect example of what the market is willing to pay for a property. And while that's the goal of an appraisal, it's not always possible. Appraisals are based upon historical sales data, and that data is then brought current through the use of a market adjustment or a time adjustment. Market adjustments can only be so accurately made. Again, we're looking at past data to figure out what the prices should have done in the future. For most people, the use of a market adjustment is based upon a published or calculated statistic, such as a simple year-over-year price appreciation trend. So for example, when you hear somebody say something like, the market's increasing 18%, generally what they're quoting is a year-over-year statistic of median price in two different periods. So let's say you're looking at October of 2021 and October of 2022. You're going to look at the median price in October of 2021 and again in October of 2022 and calculate what that change in price is. The problem with looking at a simple year-over-year statistic in that case is that you're looking at a very small data set for those 2 months and you're ignoring everything that happens in between. So while an appraiser ideally would use a market analysis and a market trend calculation to figure out what that appreciation should be, if it's not done correctly, it is hard for the market data in the past to accurately be brought up to date to represent what the current buyers in the current market would be willing to pay. Ultimately, all real estate statistics are lagging indicators, meaning that they already happened and they showed what happened, not what is going to happen. While appraisers try to counteract this, again, unfortunately, sometimes the time adjustments cannot fully bring the data to present values extremely accurately. So what is the big difference between market value and appraisal value? Ultimately, market value is based on buyer emotion. That means it greatly is influenced by supply and demand, and it changes quickly, much more quickly than the statistics are able to catch up with it. And while that might impact what your buyer or seller is willing to offer or take for a house, it doesn't matter to the lender what that emotion is. They want to see provable facts as to what a house is worth. This is why an appraisal is needed. Ultimately, a lender is looking for an appraisal to figure out what the most verifiable value of a property is in the case that they were to need to take the property back in foreclosure. In the case that a borrower defaults, the bank wants to know what is the most likely value that they can sell the property for. Now, the price that a buyer in the market might be willing to offer, which would be represented by market value and is based on emotion, might be the most that that specific buyer is willing to pay. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the amount of money that the typical buyer would be willing to pay. And if a bank has to take a property back, what they're most interested in is what is the most likely value that a typical buyer would pay so that they can get rid of the house quickly for the most amount of money. And while they might be willing to do some work to it or sit on it for a little while to be able to get a reasonable value, they don't want to maximize the value in the same way that an owner-occupant wants to maximize it in the sale of their own property. This is one of the reasons that lenders have traditionally been hard on appraisers when there's large time adjustments involved. The reason for that is because prior to the time adjustments, the amount that a home sold for is a fact. For example, let's say a house sold 6 months ago for $500,000. It is a fact that that home sold at that time for $500,000. Now, let's assume that the market is showing a 12% increase per year. That same home that sold 6 months ago for $500,000 should require a 6% adjustment, which is simply just the 12% per year divided by 12 months, which is 1% per month, multiplied by the 6 months since the time of sale, would give you a 6% of sale price time adjustment. So the adjusted price of that comp would be $530,000, meaning that if that same home sold today, we're estimating that that home would sell for $530,000 instead of $500,000. The problem is that this is an estimate. And while it might be based upon very good statistical analysis, it's still not a fact, like the fact that the home did sell for $500,000. In the case that a time adjustment is given, especially if it's a really big one, the lenders want to see a ton of proof as to why that is a valid time adjustment. For this reason, time adjustments are probably the most important statistic and the most important adjustment made in the process of valuing a property. Unfortunately, many times they're also the least supportable. As I mentioned before, most times people use a simple year-over-year type calculation to come up with the value of the time adjustment. And while these adjustments are quick and easy to find, they are generally not supported or don't have enough data behind them to give an accurate representation of the value increase or decrease over that period of time. The better you can get at estimating the time adjustments needed for a property, the better you will be at estimating the true value of a property in any type of market, whether it's a consistent increase or consistent decrease, or maybe even a changing market like we've experienced recently. All right, so now we've talked about what these two types of value are and how they differ from each other. The real important question is, how do they affect your job as a real estate agent? Your job as a real estate agent is to get your clients the most value possible, right? If you're representing a seller, you're likely trying to help them maximize the value that they sell their property for. And if you're helping a buyer, you're most likely trying to help them minimize the amount that they're having to offer to get that property under contract. But the thing is, these goals are more based upon the market value than the appraisal value. However, the appraisal value needs to be considered because it has a larger impact on the sale of a home than the market value actually does. Why is that? Well, according to NAR, 87% of real estate transactions involved a loan, which means that 87% of the time, the maximum amount a seller can sell a house for is the appraised value, unless the buyer is willing to bring additional cash to closing in the form of an appraisal gap. It also means that 87% of the time, the most money that you can offer if you're the buyer is the appraised value. Again, unless you're willing to come to the table with extra cash. So how can you use the knowledge between appraisal value and market value to help your clients? Well, we believe that there are 3 important ways to do so. First and foremost, you can use it to prepare your clients. If you're working with a seller, you can use it to prepare them for what they might actually receive in the market, which would be the market value, but you also can use it to prepare them for what they're likely to see on the appraisal in the appraisal value and any differences between the two. Many times sellers get attached to a contract price only to later have their hopes crushed when an appraisal comes in low. Even worse than that happening is when a seller gets set on a certain price that they received in an offer and they make a decision of their next purchase based upon the increased value that they think they're going to get, only to find out that the appraisal won't support it and that they're going to have to sell the house for less anyway. Hopefully that hasn't happened to you, but it's more common than you might think. Now, if you're working with a buyer, it's important to highlight these 2 different values because it's important for them to know that while they may feel that they should offer a certain price, they also need to understand what it is likely to appraise for. Again, if they're not prepared to come to the table with a lot of additional cash, they need to know that the maximum that they can offer would be the appraised value. Not that many years ago, an appraisal gap was unheard of, but over the last couple of years, it's become pretty common. Now, as the market changes, again, it will probably become less common, but as of right now, helping a buyer understand the difference between the market value that they may have to offer and the appraisal value that their lender will loan upon helps them identify whether or not a gap is needed. Now, the second way you can use it is to help better analyze offers. Let's look at an example. Let's say you have a property that you've listed that is likely to appraise for $500,000. But in the listing, you have now received multiple offers bidding it all the way up to $560,000. Knowing the difference between those two numbers, the $500,000 appraisal value and the $560,000 market value, can help you analyze the offers you're receiving. Let's say you've received multiple offers. Which one would be a better offer in this case? The first one, let's say, is a $560,000 offer with a $7,500 appraisal gap. And the second one is a $525,000 offer with a $25,000 appraisal gap. Well, at first glance, especially to the client, it might seem like the $560,000 offer is better. If you know that the appraised value is likely to be $500,000, you would understand that the $560,000 offer with a $7,500 appraisal gap would only net the seller $507,500, where the second offer at $525,000 with a $25,000 appraisal gap would actually net the seller $525,000. So in this case, the market value is a lot less important than the appraised value, and knowing the difference between those would help guide you to the correct offer to take, which would ultimately have netted the client a lot more money. It can also help you better analyze the type of offers your clients should make. Let's say they're in the buyer's seat in this case. Knowing what the appraisal value is likely to be and knowing what the market value is potentially going to be based upon your conversations with the selling agent, it can help you identify what the buyer should offer and ultimately be able to support that to the listing agent. Again, looking at the previous example, if you had the offer coming in at the $525,000 with the $25,000 gap, you could easily make the point to the selling agent that you are coming in lower than potentially some of the other offers, but that the appraisal gap you're offering you feel will give a larger net result to the seller than many of the other offers they may receive. And the last way that we recommend using it is to fight a low appraisal. Ideally, you hope that an appraisal doesn't come in low, but if you know the potential appraisal value and the market value, you have an easier time to fight the appraisal value in a reconsideration or value request. Now, knowing the potential appraisal value does not guarantee that you can get the appraisal raised. It does at least give you a better understanding of what data is going to be used so that you can hopefully present the correct data to the lender or the appraiser if the value comes in low. Having a good estimate of where the appraisal value may fall does not guarantee that the appraisal will actually fall there, but at least it does give you a better way to have a grasp on what the potential value should be so that you can present additional data to the lender if needed in a reconsideration of value request. Ultimately, every appraiser looks at things slightly different and has a different methodology behind calculating their appraised value. But a good estimate of value and understanding of the market conditions can help you present a clear and concise reason to the lender as to why you think the value potentially should be higher in the case that it does come in low. After all, the best way to fight a low appraisal is to provide good comparables adjusted with the appraiser's adjustments that they already used that show a lower or similar gross adjustment percentage to the comps already used in the report. All right, so hopefully now you have a little bit better view of the differences between the market value and the appraisal value and ultimately how it impacts your job as a real estate agent. Next time you hear somebody say market value is whatever a buyer is willing to pay, you'll know that they're right, but you'll also know that that might not matter. Ultimately, the appraisal value has more impact on the potential sale and loan than the market value of a property. When the time comes and the market changes, understanding these two types of value and being able to accurately estimate the value of a property will be one of the most important things you can do as a real estate agent. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you found some of this information helpful. If you did, I'd love it if you'd hit the like button. And while you're at it, go ahead and follow us on some of your favorite social media channels to make sure that you can connect with us, where we can answer questions and just get to know you a little bit. Thanks again for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.